Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into compelling sources to pull out the knowledge and insights that really matter for you.
That's right.
Today we're exploring the world of early Jesuit travelers in Central Asia. We're talking 1603 to 1721.
A fascinating period.
Our mission, basically, is to journey through their own writings, personal accounts, missionary records, geographical notes, to get a glimpse of a world that was, well, largely unknown to the West back then.
Yeah, it's a unique window.
Get ready for some surprising stuff. Encounters with maybe lost Christian communities, the hunt for new trade routes, amazing descriptions of exotic places and cultures, and just the sheer grit of these explorers.
Incredible endurance, really.
Let's dive in. We should start with Bento de Goes, shouldn't we? His quest.
Yes, Bento de Goes. His journey, roughly 1603 to 1607, was driven by a really big question at the time. Was Cathay, the place Marco Polo described centuries earlier, was it actually the same place as China?
Right. Because European knowledge of the East, it went back ages, to Roman times even. But there were still huge gaps, weren't there? Lots of uncertainty.
Exactly. And, figuring that out was key.
And it wasn't just like academic curiosity, was it? There were these conflicting reports flying around Europe.
Mm-hmm.
You had Matteo Ricci, the famous Jesuit in Beijing, saying, yep, Cathay and China, they're one and the same. But then reports from Lahore mentioned Christian communities in some land that didn't quite match Ricci's picture.
And Ricci himself was curiously silent about those specific Lahore reports. That discrepancy was really the core motivation for Goes.
Oh, okay.
The thinking was, well, even if they didn't find some totally new land or huge Christian populations, the journey itself might reveal something incredibly valuable.
Like a new route.
Precisely, a new land route to the east that could potentially bypass the long, dangerous sea voyages. Huge implications for trade, for power.
And Goes wasn't just some guy wandering off on his own, right?
No.
He had some serious backing.
Oh, absolutely. King Philip II of Spain saw the potential. He told his viceroy in India to give Goes whatever help he needed.
Okay.
And maybe even more significantly, the Mughal Emperor Akbar, known for being intellectually curious, religiously tolerant, he approved it too.
Really?
Yeah. He gave Goes letters of recommendation, crucial things to have, and he also chipped in 400 gold pieces for expenses.
Wow, that's quite an endorsement.
It really was, especially since Akbar wasn't generally known for just handing out cash like that. It showed his interest.
So, armed with royal blessings and a bit of funding,
Yeah.
Goes sets off from Agra in January 1603. Heads through Lahore. Yeah, but things got tough pretty quickly after that, didn't they? Beyond the main routes.
Oh, definitely. The early part involved crossing the Hindu Kush Mountains, a massive undertaking.
Right.
And there they ran into the Kafir people. An independent group lived in the mountains, and apparently they really scared the local Afghans.
Interesting. What were they like?
Well, the accounts mention some pretty stark customs, like a Seda Posh man, one of this group, had to go bareheaded until he'd killed a Muslim.
Seriously?
Yeah, and to get married, he supposedly needed to have killed two.
Whoa.
There's also a mention of wine being served freely at their funerals. Gives you a real glimpse into a society operating way outside the norms of the time.
That's a completely different world from where they started. And the tough terrain just kept coming as they went east.
It did. Moving into Badakhshan, travel got even harder. Roads were described as incredibly narrow, treacherous, often just single file along these high riverbanks.
Sounds dangerous.
Very. And interestingly, Marco Polo had mentioned the bad roads in the same area centuries before. The river was likely the Paj, the upper Amu Darya, so Goz's descriptions actually line up pretty well with later info.
Then came the really big one, crossing the Pamirs, the roof of the world.
Mm-hmm.
I can hardly imagine the conditions.
The Pamirs were extreme. Goes wrote about this intense, biting cold, absolutely no fuel to burn, and the air was so thin, people and animals struggled just to breathe.
Altitude sickness, basically.
Must have been. They tried eating garlic, onions, dried apples, even rubbed garlic on the animals' gums. Trying anything,
Wow.
And the journey across could take 40 days if there was heavy snow. It's just incredible they made it through it all.
Absolutely testament to their resilience.
Oh.
So after all that, they finally make it to Yarkand. Around November 1603, the caravan must have been exhausted.
Yeah, that Pamir crossing took a huge toll. Goes realized they needed fresh supplies, fresh animals, so he decided to leave the main, worn-out caravan in Yarkand and push on ahead himself.
Yarkand was important then.
Oh, yes. Capital of Kashgar Kingdom. A major hub on the Silk Roads, very strategic.
Okay. So from there, he heads towards the gateway to China itself, a place called Suchu. And this place had a weird system for trade, right?
Really fascinating, yeah. Suchu operated with these basically pseudo-ambassador merchants.
Pseudo-ambassador.
Yeah. Every 5 years, these groups of exactly 72 traders, representing 7 or 8 different countries, would show up. They presented themselves as ambassadors, bringing tribute, jade, diamonds, valuable pigments.
Okay.
And the Chinese state actually paid for their journey to the capital and back.
That sounds generous.
Well, Ricci thought it was maybe more symbolic than profitable for the emperor. He paid a lot for the goods, apparently seeing it as beneath his dignity to just accept gifts freely. It shows this complex mix of trade, diplomacy, cultural face-saving, really.
And around there, Goes met a princess pilgrim. And that story tells us a lot about Jade.
It really does. This princess, probably short on funds, asked the merchants for help, promised repayment back in Yarkand. Goes saw an opportunity. He loaned her 600 gold pieces, but, and this is the key part, he insisted the whole amount be repaid in transparent marble.
Which was jade. That's right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's right. This stone had immense cultural weight in the East, especially China, associated with virtues like modesty, justice, mercy.
Mm-hmm.
People wore nephrite ornaments all the time, men and women, often as amulets against sickness. So this wasn't just a loan. It highlighted how incredibly valuable culturally and economically this stuff was.
It's amazing how different the value was compared to Europe then. And he actually got to see where it came from.
He did. Goes was the first European since Marco Polo to reach the main source area around Khotan.
And how did they get it?
Pretty basic methods, apparently. Mostly searching among stones washed down from the mountains. Small-scale stuff, finding good pieces was often just luck.
Any particular kind was best?
Yeah, white pieces with yellow spots, called gush, were the most prized. Khotan even had little workshops making things out of nephrite. His first-hand look gives us a great snapshot of the early jade trade.
So, after seeing the jade mines, Goes keeps heading east. Still a long way to go, more dangers.
Definitely. He went through key oasis towns, Aksu, Kucha, Kurla, Turfan, and Chami, skirting the massive Tarim Basin using both northern and southern routes. But pinning down his exact route gets tricky here. Tragically, a lot of his detailed journal was lost after he died.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And the bits that survived went through multiple translations. His original notes, maybe Portuguese or Latin, then into Persian by his Armenian companion Isaac, then Ricci translated that into Italian.
So lots of room for error or distortion.
Inevitably, yes. Makes precise mapping very difficult.
And the danger didn't let up, especially near the Chinese border.
Not at all. The stretch between a place called Cialis and the Great Wall was notorious for Tartar raids.
So they had to be careful.
Extremely. Often traveling at night, total silence, trying to avoid being spotted. Locals were usually left alone. The Tartars saw them as labor, but unaccompanied travelers, especially Muslims, were prime targets. Really highlights the risks.
Finally, though, after all those years, all that hardship, he reaches Suchu, around Christmas, 1605. And that's where he gets the big confirmation.
Yes. In Suchu, he meets Muslim merchants returning from Beijing, Pekin, as they called it then, and they confirmed it without a doubt. There were European priests living in the capital.
The proof he needed.
Exactly. Definitive proof goes that Cathay and China were the same place. A massive geographical discovery.
But getting that news back to Ricci and the others in Beijing wasn't easy, was it? Communication was slow.
Agonizingly slow. His first letters from Suchu just didn't get through. Partly because Goes didn't know Ricci's Chinese name, and he addressed them using European script. Untraceable in the Chinese system.
Practical problems.
Right. It wasn't until mid-November 1606 that Ricci finally got a letter Goes had sent months before.
What did it say?
Goes detailed the immense difficulties, the dangers, stressed it wasn't a viable trade route commercially, and basically begged for immediate help to get to Beijing. He even said he hoped to return to India via Canton eventually.
And Ricci acted quickly, even though winter was setting in, sent someone to meet him.
He did. Recognizing how important this was, Ricci sent a lay brother, Fernandez, despite the harsh winter. A 4-month journey in those conditions. Incredibly tough in itself.
Wow.
Fernandez set out in December 1606. He finally reached Sucio at the very end of March 1607. Tragically, he found Bento de Goes desperately ill on his deathbed.
Oh, devastating. After everything he'd been through. Such a heartbreaking end.
It really is poignant.
But even dying then, he'd done it. He'd proven his point.
Unquestionably. Through sheer perseverance, Bento de Goes proved Cathay was China by reaching it overland from the west. The first European in modern times to do it, He bridged centuries of legend and geographical fact.
But sadly, that's not quite the end of the story, is it? There's a rather grim epilogue.
Yes, unfortunately. After Doe's died, his belongings, including that invaluable detailed journal, were seized by some of his fellow travelers.
Why?
They knew he'd lent them a lot of money. And in a truly awful act, they tore up his diary, probably to destroy the record of their debt.
Unbelievable.
Only scattered bits were saved by Isaac, his loyal Armenian companion, and brother Fernandez. Plus a few things the thieves didn't think were valuable.
And it didn't end there.
No. Isaac was then wrongly imprisoned for months. Fernandez, who didn't initially know Persian, learned it secretly from Isaac at night so he could argue their case.
Resourceful.
Very. But they were up against rich merchants who influenced the local judges. It took 5 long months of constant effort before they finally managed to get the remaining scraps of Goz's possessions delivered to Ricci in Beijing.
What a sad footnote. Really shows the harsh realities they faced.
It does. A very bittersweet end to a monumental journey.
Okay, let's shift gears now. Let's look at another incredible figure who ventured into equally unknown lands, Antonio de Andrade, and his journeys into Tibet in the early 17th century.
Right, Andrade. He's hugely significant. The first European we know of who actually crossed the high Himalayas and got into Tibet from India.
But there's some confusion about his exact route, isn't there? Some older accounts got it wrong?
Yes, exactly. Earlier writers sometimes credited him with reaching Lake Mansarawar or a region called Tangut, but the sources we're looking at give a clearer picture.
So where did his first trip in 1624 actually take him?
His route started towards Jashamath and then followed the Alaknanda River, also called the Vishnu Ganga.
Dangerous journey.
Very. He mentions these terrifying rope bridges at first, and later crossing on bridges made of packed, frozen snow over the river. He eventually reached the big pagoda at Badrinath, a major pilgrimage site, around late May or early June 1624.
And Badrinath is already pretty high and remote, but he went even further north, pushed the boundaries.
He did. Past Badrinath, he went on to the village of Mana. That was actually the furthest point reached by earlier British explorers Raper and Webb.
Okay.
Mana was mostly a summer spot for Bhotia traders. They did a lot of the Trans-Himalayan trade. It's basically the last inhabited place before the Mana Pass.
And beyond Mana.
A harsh, high-altitude desert, only passable for maybe 2 months a year because the conditions are so extreme. Andrade described it as having absolutely no vegetation and mentioned deadly, noxious vapors.
Noxious vapors. Sounds mysterious.
Almost certainly severe mountain sickness, altitude sickness from the lack of oxygen at those heights.
Right. It's fascinating how they interpreted those natural effects back then. And this area is tied up with figuring out where the Ganges comes from, isn't it? Historically.
It is, yeah. For centuries, the source of the Ganges was wrapped in myth and, frankly, guesswork. Hindu tradition often placed it near Lake Mansarawar, or another lake nearby, Rakastal, probably.
And old maps showed that.
Often, yes, like Onville's famous map from 1733. It showed the Ganges flowing right out of Mansarawar. That was often based on surveys done by Tibetan lamas, instructed by Father Regis, another Jesuit cartographer.
But they weren't always reliable.
Well, even Regis thought the info was a bit shaky. The lamas couldn't always get to places like Mount Kailash themselves because of political unrest in Tibet sometimes. Shows how hard it was to get accurate mapping done, relying on secondhand info.
So Andrade's first trip was groundbreaking. But he went back, didn't he? He wanted to establish something more permanent.
Yes, he was determined. His second journey led directly to setting up a Jesuit mission at Saparang, an important place in western Tibet.
And how was that received?
Initially, quite well. He actually got the support of the local king. The mission had a period of relative success, some acceptance.
But that didn't last. Things went wrong.
Unfortunately, no. The local lamas started to get increasingly unhappy. They likely felt their traditional religious authority was being undermined by the Christian mission's presence and influence.
Okay.
This discontent eventually boiled over into a full-blown revolution in 1630. It happened just after Andrade himself had been recalled back to Goa.
Bad timing.
Terrible timing. The rebellion overthrew the friendly king who'd supported them. It led to intense persecution of the Christians. Saparang was besieged. The king was kidnapped and taken off to Leh. And the missionaries left behind faced, well, terrible consequences.
What a tragic end to that effort.
Yeah.
Shows the political and religious complexity.
Absolutely. A very volatile situation.
But even after that disaster, other Jesuits kept trying to explore the area, didn't they?
They did. The effort continued. Francisco de Azevedo, for instance, he later visited Badrinath too and gave more descriptions of the temple and the area.
Right.
But more importantly, Azevedo traveled to Leh in Ladakh. He provided really insightful observations about the landscape, the people, their customs.
Did he meet the ruler?
Yes, he had a formal audience with King Sengjam Gal, left vivid descriptions of the king's appearance, how the gifts were received.
And local customs?
He noted things like how they prepared tea and the staple food zainam, that's roasted barley flour, often mixed with tea butter, still a staple up there.
Where else did Azevedo go?
His journey took him through tough places like Darcha in the Hul, harsh climate, not much growing. Then eventually into the more prosperous Kulu region before he finally got back to Agra in January 1632. A really significant journey of observation.
Sounds like he covered a lot of ground and gathered valuable details.
Huh.
Okay, let's move east now to another pair, Stephen Kachella and John Cabral, mid-1620s. They were also looking for a new route to Tibet, right? From India.
That's right. Kachella and Cabral, their mission in 1626-27 was specifically about finding another way into Tibet, starting from Hooghly in Bengal.
And they traveled in disguise.
Initially, yes, as Portuguese soldiers. The local Nawab wasn't around, so it was safer that way. They were guided by another father, Simon de Figueiredo. Their first goal was Dhaka, but they ran into trouble almost immediately.
They got arrested right away. Shows how unpredictable things were.
Yes, pretty much as soon as they got to Dhaka, they and their boat and supplies were seized by the authorities. The account doesn't say exactly why. They were let go after about 12 days, but it was a stark warning. Because of the risk, another member of their party, Fontaboa, was sent back to Hooghly. Sadly, he got sick there and died soon after. A rough start.
Definitely a precarious situation.
Yeah.
But despite that loss, Kachella and Cabral pushed on through Cooch Behar. And Kachella made some interesting notes about the river there.
He did. His notes on Cooch Behar are quite useful for historical geography. When you compare his account to later surveys, it looks like the main channel of the Torsa River shifted significantly over the centuries.
How so?
Well, in 1626, when Kachella was there, the river seems to have flowed much further west, and it might have been bigger, carried more water than later records show.
But the area itself.
His general description: fertile, pleasant countryside, active river trade that pretty much matches later accounts, even with the river changing course.
Okay. So from Cooch Behar, they head into the mountains, a less familiar area. And things got dramatic again.
Their entry into the mountains, probably parts of modern Bhutan, which Tibetans called Mon or Botanter, led to them being imprisoned again in a place called Runate.
Imprisoned again. Why this time?
It seems they were linked somehow to a local official who, for some reason, told the villagers to hold on to the travelers until he showed up himself. And he wasn't expected for months. Just shows how tricky navigating local power could be.
But Kachella wasn't one to sit around, was he? He tried to escape on his own.
He did. Got impatient with being stuck there. He tried to slip away with a young Christian boy from their group and a couple of local guys who'd offered to help.
Did it work?
No, it went badly wrong. The very guys who offered to help robbed him of everything he had left. He was forced to stumble back to Runate through a dark, snowy night.
Oh, awful. What about Cabral?
When Kachella got back, he found Cabral had actually managed to sort things out, maybe through negotiation, or maybe the villagers just realized it was pointless trying to hold them.
So eventually, despite all that, they reached a place called Cambarasi, and they met the local king there, who was also a religious leader.
Yes, in Cambarasi, it was ruled by King Dharmaraja. He held both temporal power as king and was a highly respected great lama.
How did he receive them?
Surprisingly well. Very welcoming, hospitable. The king seemed genuinely interested in their religion. He gave them a place to stay, made sure they had food and supplies. A very positive initial contact, at least at the royal level.
And Kachella wrote about the monks around the king, their daily lives.
Yes, detailed notes about the Galawa Lamas. About 100 younger monks, like a monastic school at the court. He said they lived a very strict life.
Like what?
No marriage, only one main meal before noon, no rice, meat, or fish after that. Never drank wine, spent huge amounts of time praying and studying. It's a valuable first-hand look at monastic life in that region.
He also mentioned local customs about death and the king's role.
Yeah, he saw how much reverence people had for King Dharmaraja. They'd give him big gifts during their lifetime, hoping he'd help their souls get to heaven after they died.
And at the moment of death.
It was customary to call the king to the bedside. He would pull out a few strands of the dying person's hair. This ritual was believed to help the soul ascend.
Wow.
And doing it before death was considered really bad luck for everyone involved. Shows how intertwined religion and kingship were there.
So they had this warm welcome, observed these customs, but they didn't stay long in Cambarasi.
No, their stay was relatively short, even though the start was positive. It's worth noting, Casella mentioned the climate was very healthy there, much better than Cooch Behar, where he'd been sick. He felt great, saw the locals seemed robust, lived long lives.
And the king's welcome was unusual.
Well, the king wasn't generally known for being generous to outsiders, but he seemed genuinely open to them, maybe because he'd invited Father Andrada earlier. Suggests a consistent interest in engaging with these foreigners.
Okay, let's change direction now. A different journey. John Gruber and Albert Dorville. Mid-17th century, they went the other way, didn't they? China towards India.
Exactly. Gruber and Dorville's trip, mostly known from Gruber's letters from the 1660s, gives us this unique east-to-west perspective across Central Asia. They started from Xi'an Siganfu back then in June 1661.
And Gruber mentions seeing the Great Wall near Shanning. That's caused some debate, hasn't it?
It has, yeah, because based on what we know now, archaeologically and historically, there isn't really a major, obvious section of the Great Wall that far west, near Shanning.
So maybe he was mistaken.
Some scholars think so, just an error. But Gruber's descriptions of Shanning itself, its location, are pretty detailed. It seems unlikely he'd make such a basic mistake about the wall being right there.
So what's the thinking?
Well, it raises questions. Maybe the wall did extend further west in the 17th century, but was more fragmented, less substantial than the famous bits further east. Or maybe just in a very poor state of repair. It's a bit of a puzzle.
Okay. From Xining, they went past Lake Kokonor, Big Lake. But Gruber's description has some issues, too.
He compared Kokonor size to the Caspian Sea, which is a massive overestimate. Kokonor is big, but not that big. Maybe the slightly salty water fooled him.
And he got the rivers wrong.
Yeah, he mistakenly said the Yellow River starts in Lake Kokonor, geographically incorrect. Then later, he seems to confuse the small local river, the Xining Ho, with the actual huge Huang Ho, the Yellow River.
Seems like a strange mistake for an experienced traveler.
It does, but his own writings show the confusion. He correctly identifies a fort near Xining as being key for crossing either the mountains or the Yellow River, reinforcing the mix-up.
Interesting. And the name Kokonor.
Yeah, he said it meant Great Sea, but actually in the local language, Kokonor means Blue Lake. So maybe some misunderstanding of local terms, too.
Okay. Continuing west, they went through a place Gruber called Tokpakai. Sounded pretty empty. And hard to pinpoint now.
He described Toktakai as basically an uninhabited desert, with a river of the same name running through it. He said the river was as wide as the Danube in Europe, but shallow enough to ride a horse across.
Doesn't match anything known.
Not easily. Some historians guess it might be the Toktonai Ulan Murin, a tributary of the Mura Usa, the upper Yangtze. But the size doesn't really fit his description of being as wide as the Danube. It really shows how tough it is to map these old accounts precisely. Language barriers, different ways of measuring.
Right, and the whole journey across the Tibetan Plateau, between Xining and Lhasa, that must have been incredibly grueling. The terrain, the climate.
The accounts really stress how stark and desolate it was. Rugged mountains mixed with flat, sandy plains, not much vegetation, occasional small rivers.
What did Gruber call the region?
He noted various names, Marco Polo's Lop, the Tartar name Sarno. He saw nomadic groups living there, but not much wildlife except for some kind of large wild bulls.
And no settlements.
He specifically highlighted the emptiness. Said for 3 straight months of travel, after leaving the signing area, until they get close to Lhasa, they didn't see a single cultivated field or any sign of permanent farming. Just vast, harsh emptiness.
And they had to cross major mountain ranges, too. The Bayankara, the Tangla, high-altitude stuff.
Definitely. Crossing the Bayankara brought them to the Marusa, the Blue River, which they managed to ford. But then came the Tangla Range, a truly massive barrier.
Tough crossing.
Even later explorers like Przewalski in the 19th century said crossing the Tangla took days, and you risked running into local groups. The climb and descent were gradual, but incredibly high, around 5,000 meters.
Wow.
Finally, as they neared Nagchu, they had to switch transport. Camels and horses weren't cutting it anymore on the tough terrain towards Lhasa, so they switched to yaks. Much best suited for high-altitude Tibet.
Makes sense. Okay, finally, let's turn to Hippolyte Desideri. Early 18th century. He spent a long time in Tibet, didn't he? Gave us a really deep look at Lhasa and the culture.
Desideri is incredibly important. He arrived in Lhasa in 1716 and stayed for several years. Unlike the earlier travelers who mostly passed through, Desideri really immersed himself.
How so?
He dedicated himself to learning Tibetan, studying the local customs, the religion in detail. For a long time, not much was known about his work, but then his full manuscript was rediscovered. It's an absolute treasure trove of information about Tibet at that time.
And getting to Lhasa was a journey in itself for him, right? Across India, the Himalayas.
Oh, a huge undertaking. From Italy through India, Delhi, Agra, Srinagar, and Kashmir, then across Ladakh, which he called Little Tibet, and finally Lhasa.
What did he notice in Ladakh?
He made sharp observations, language, religion, customs, noted similarities to what he'd later find in Central Tibet, or Third Tibet as he called it. He mentioned the local barley beer, Chang, and how common tea was still true today.
And the journey continued east.
Yes, through the high, mostly empty province of Ngari, passed by the sacred Mount Kailash. Then finally, after months of hard travel, he arrived in Lhasa, a city that was still wrapped in mystery for the West.
Yeah, Lhasa was this legendary, almost mythical place for Europeans then. His descriptions must have been revolutionary.
They really were. Based on his first-hand look, Lhasa was a big, busy city. Lots of impressive monasteries, Dabung, Sera, Galden, the big university ones, plus the Potala Palace, of course, the Dalai Lama's winter home, and the Jokhang Temple, the most sacred spot in Tibet.
Did he describe city life?
He mentioned the Lingkhor, that's the ritual walk, the circumambulation around the sacred parts of the city. He also talked about other temples like Muru, maybe linking it to Tartars and Ramokeche, though some of his details there don't quite match modern understanding perfectly.
And he didn't just stay in Lhasa, right? He described other regions too.
Yes, his account isn't just about the capital. He described other areas, Tokpo, with its varied landscape and monasteries, Loro, known for gold, Nang, which had lots of forests, and Kongbo, which was split into upper and lower parts and seemed more fertile, more involved in trade. Gives you a sense of Tibet's regional diversity back then.
And he got into the details of everyday life, like dealing with sickness and death.
Meticulously. He noted that when people got sick, they'd often consult sorcerers or lamas first. If things got really bad, monks might gather for the quorum prayers and offerings for recovery.
And death customs.
He described a whole range, depending on social status. Cremation for the wealthy or high-ranking, exposure on holy mountains, maybe for religious figures. Then there is sky burial dismemberment for vultures at specific sites called turtro, more common for ordinary people. And sometimes disposal in rivers.
Fascinating glimpse into their beliefs and social structure.
Absolutely. These different rites really show the social hierarchy and the spiritual worldview.
So Desideri's long stay, his language learning, his deep dive into the culture that really sets his account apart, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Much deeper than the earlier glimpses.
Precisely. Spending years there allowed him a level of understanding, a nuance that people just passing through couldn't possibly achieve. He said himself his conclusions were based on years of experience, studying texts, talking extensively with Tibetans. Makes his account exceptionally valuable, really reliable as a historical record.
Just incredible journeys, often harrowing, I imagine. But the insights they brought back, cultural, geographical, were invaluable, venturing into places completely unknown in the West.
Absolutely. Their accounts, yeah, they might have errors sometimes given the limitations back then, but they offer this unique historical lens on the geography, the cultures, the religions of Central Asia, places that were just blank spots on the map for most Europeans for so long.
It really makes you think about why they did it, doesn't it? It seems like this complex mix, deep religious faith, sure, but also this powerful curiosity about the world, wanting to discover, wanting to connect East and West.
Definitely a blend of motivations. Religious zeal, geographical curiosity, maybe even political or commercial ambitions in finding new routes and connections.
Yeah. Which brings us to a final thought for you, listening. How do these early encounters, these often difficult first contacts driven by all these different motives, how do they shape how we see the world's interconnectedness today?
And maybe, what can we learn from the sheer perseverance, the adaptability, the courage of these figures facing the vast unknown? Something to chew on long after we finish this deep dive.